What's up, guys? We're going to be looking at two fights this weekend. The big boxing match between Manny Pacquiao versus Yordenis Ugas. And then afterward, we're going to be looking at the main event of the UFC card this Saturday between Jared Cannonier and Kelvin Gastelum. Both very interesting fights, very fun, and with huge importance for their respective sports and divisions. But first, we're going to be looking at Manny versus Ugas. First things first, man, you cannot overlook it. Manny Pacquiao is much smaller than Ugas. These two guys are like two weight classes apart in boxing. Manny Pacquiao being the far smaller fighter, but as we all know, that is not unusual for Pacquiao. He uses his speed as an advantage in all of his fights, and specifically Ugas is a bit slower than Pacquiao's previous opponents. Not only is his hand speed a bit slow, but he telegraphs a lot of his punches, especially that jab of his. If he cannot keep the jab on Manny Pacquiao or attempt to jam the lead hand, Pacquiao is going to be able to control the space. Pacquiao's ability to set traps are something else, man. Using that jab of his, he gets you to move a certain direction, take off a certain angle when he's pumping out those jabs. That is where he finds the opportunities for his left hand or his left straight lead right overhand combination that he even dropped Keith Thurman with in his last fight. And that is extremely interesting about Manny Pacquiao, man. He's 42 years old and he's still at the top of the sport. Beating Keith Thurman, Adrian Broner, I mean, these are legit competition that he is defeating much younger than he is. The only issue I have for him going into a fight with Ugas is he's coming off over a 2-year layoff. The last time he fought was against Keith Thurman in July 20th of 2019. Whereas previously, when he was beating guys like Timothy Bradley and Jesse Vargas, all the way into the Keith Thurman fight, he was staying active, at least fighting one time a year. With a 2-year layoff all of a sudden, the biggest layoff of his entire career, combined with his age and fighting one of the biggest opponents of his entire career, he's really trying to prove that size doesn't matter. It does create some questions for Pacquiao's abilities here. Is he going to look even older in this fight than he did in some of his most recent? He has defied the odds so far. I wonder if he's going to defy the 2-year layoff odds as well. Now, Ugas is not the biggest puncher in the world. He doesn't commit with that kind of power all the time, but with the damage that Manny has endured, there is a high probability that Ugas can find that right hand of his or check left hook and attempt to stifle Pacquiao in his tracks, because the difference with Pacquiao these days compared to how he was in his prime, he's not as fast as he used to be. That is obvious. He's chasing a little bit too much with his left hand these days. He used to be a lot more measuring with his left. Him chasing and overextending can get him caught by the right hand of Ugas. It's the right hand of Pacquiao that's going to create more issues for Ugas, right? As a southpaw fighter, the jabs, the right uppercuts, the right hooks, everything that comes off the right side from Pacquiao is going to be extremely effective. What worries me for Pacquiao is when he attempts his left hand. Against Keith Thurman, Pacquiao was getting countered here and there, check left hooks and right hands against that orthodox fighter for being so reckless with his power shots. And the orthodox versus southpaw matchup that this is going to be, Ugas may be able to use his reach advantage, pull back on that left hand and counter with his own right either to the head or to the body, which he likes to do as well. A huge tactic of his was pulling back on Sean Porter's right hand to land uppercuts to the body. And with these uppercuts, Ugas is a consistent jabber. He likes to keep that left hand on you to measure distance, but again, he does telegraph it greatly and he is pretty slow on the trigger. So there's definitely going to be openings for Manny Pacquiao to explode on and take advantage of the telegraph. Pacquiao's not only more tricky with his offense, he's a lot more menacing with some of his combinations. The guy may be small, but man, he definitely packs a lot of power. And I could definitely see that lead right overhand catching Ugas here and there after dropping his own jab, dropping his hands to throw the body shots, dropping his hands to throw uppercuts, and ultimately try to trade with Pacquiao in close exchange, because it might be difficult for Ugas to keep Pacquiao away from him safely. Because what he tends to do is he pulls on you. He uses that long reach of his to keep you at bay, but in the process, he likes to pull back away from your punches. Sometimes he'll drop the lead hand of his if he's sticking out a jab, and honestly, his defense is extremely one-dimensional. When someone uses attributes as a means of a defense against someone who's faster and sets traps, it usually does not go well for the guy who's using his reach and using his size. And ultimately, I can see Pacquiao blitzing his way in, getting past that long reach. He's gonna have to be mindful of the right straight, especially if Ugas starts to pressure a little bit more. The more Ugas backs away, the more openings Pacquiao's going to get on him. The more that Ugas starts to pressure Pacquiao backwards and not give him that kind of respect, the more open Pacquiao will be, especially for Ugas' right hand. But ultimately, my prediction for the fight is tough with the 2-year layoff coming into this, but I'm going to side with Manny Pacquiao on this one. And I think he's going to win this fight by a decision. I see the lead right overhand landing in this fight plenty of times. The jabs and traps are going to create a lot of confusion. And ultimately, I do think Ugas is a bit too one-dimensional, even for Manny Pacquiao's skills today. And the betting odds are pretty wild on this one. the best opportunity you have is to go to mybookie.ag. They have Manny Pacquiao as a -345 favorite, and that is enticing for a lot of people who want to go and bet on this fight. Yordenis Ugas being a +275, fighting a guy who's much older than he is, and coming off a 2-year layoff, whereas Ugas has been much more active, doesn't have the kind of distractions that Pacquiao has outside of boxing. That +275 is not that bad. I don't necessarily agree with these odds. I think Pacquiao should be the favorite because I do think he's probably going to win, but the odds are a little bit too big on this one in my opinion. And not only for the winner, MyBookie has many different ways to bet on this fight, whether it's going to go the distance, the method of victory. Somehow if you predict a draw, I mean in boxing it's a lot more likely than it is in MMA, and they got you some pointers about Manny Pacquiao's betting history. This is actually really cool, man. You could go back and read about the history of the odds with Pacquiao versus Thurman, Pacquiao versus Broner, him versus Mayweather, Timothy Bradley, a lot of facts and a lot of interesting analysis that they have put into this. I absolutely recommend at least going here and absorbing this analysis, man. No other place gives you this kind of thing. Again, just go to mybookie.ag today, and while you're there, make sure to use the deposit bonus. By signing up with mybookie.ag this time, they're going to double your first deposit all the way up to $1,000. That means if you deposit $100, you get another $100 of free money to play with. In order to activate this, just use the promo code WEASEL, W-E-A-S-L-E, to take advantage of MyBookie's sign-up offer. And I'm telling you guys, the analysis they put together for the betting history is actually very beneficial for anybody who's looking at this fight specifically. And with that out of the way, we're going to go right into the UFC. The card on paper, not the greatest in my opinion, but what does that mean? In reality, it's going to be the greatest card we've ever seen. But we're going to jump right into the main event. Jared Cannonier versus Kelvin Gastelum. I cannot wait for this fight. I mean, there's a big difference in activity. Jared Cannonier has not fought in almost a year since he lost to Whitaker, whereas Kelvin Gastelum fought 4 months ago. Ironically, their last fights were both losses to Whitaker. Just shows how great that guy is. But to go even further against Jared Cannonier, he was supposed to fight Paulo Costa. Kelvin Gastelum was a bit of a short notice opponent, not super short of course. He's had some time to adjust to the style and all that, but there has been a change and there's potential that could impact his training camp. Now Kelvin and Paulo Costa, they potentially can have a very similar heavy offensive boxing style, which doesn't really change too much for Jared Cannonier's general approach. But if Kelvin starts to wrestle, knowing that that is one of Cannonier's biggest weaknesses, that makes a huge difference. Kelvin Gastelum is a lot more multifaceted than Paulo Costa is. And even though Kelvin hasn't been known to wrestle too much throughout his career, 2 fights ago when he fought Ian Heinisch, he definitely brought that skill back into his game. He was obviously more muscular in the fight, he was a little bit bigger, and using that wrestling to great extent, beating Ian Heinisch of all people, using that skill set. That was very impressive. And even though his record looks pretty salty in his last 5 fights, I mean 1-4 in his last 5, you cannot overlook the guys that he has fought and how well he fought them. He lost pretty decisively to Robert Whitaker, of course, right? Whitaker is one of the best in the world. He beat Ian Heinisch. Then against Jack Hermanson, he had success, but he made one wrong split decision of trying to walk away from Hermanson's guard and got stuck in a heel hook. The fight with Darren Till, extremely close, split decision. And then the Israel Adesanya fight was back and forth. Kelvin's record and his ranking can make it look like he's worse than he actually is. Kelvin right now is one of the best fighters in the world. He can compete with the best guys in the world still. Whereas Jared Cannonier in the middleweight division looks almost unstoppable, man. He's like a freight train. He's 3-1 in this division. The only loss to Robert Whitaker, and he has some success in the fight, hurting Whitaker in the 3rd round with a mere jab. Now, the orthodox jab is not going to be as useful in this fight because, of course, Kelvin is a southpaw fighter. This combined with the fact that Jared doesn't necessarily move forward or step in for his jabs as much as other fighters do. Not as much as Kelvin does, not as much as Whitaker does. He likes to stay stationary a bit and allow the opponent to run into his longer reach, right? He has the reach advantage against the majority of the division, so they have to move in on him. And from there, he's able to pick off his shots with great precision. And this is exactly how he hurt Whitaker with his jab. Same sort of thing. He does that on everybody. And if you can catch someone like Whitaker moving it at that kind of speed, right? Whitaker is one of the trickiest guys in the sport when it comes to his blitz. And Cannonier was able to time his jab and hurt Whitaker. It's going to be a lot easier for him, not only from that experience, but just that style to catch Kelvin Gastelum. Now, the orthodox jab is going to require Cannonier to get the inside foot on that back and forth linear movement from Kelvin. That could be a bit tricky for him. So actually his unique style of waiting for the opponent to walk into his jabs by him constantly feinting at them, creating some traps here and there, and especially in Kelvin's case, who likes to attack on straight lines, there is a smaller chance that he can land that jab as Kelvin aggressively moves on that straight line, but there's a high probability that Kelvin is going to parry that lead hand to open up for his own left. Turn it the other way around now. Cannonier switches. He doesn't shift in combinations, but he will switch and be a bit of a different fighter in the southpaw stance. But in the southpaw stance is where his jab is going to be a lot more effective. And it's also going to take away Kelvin's natural opening for his own left that he's so focused on, right? He's left-handed heavy on everything he does. Every striking attempt is a setup either the left hand, and in these days, modern times, he's added the left high kick, but more so the left hand than anything else. Left straight, left overhand, and Kelvin has gotten very comfortable of fighting orthodox fighters throughout his career. He loves that natural opening for him to take the outside foot, to line up the left. By Cannonier switching into southpaw, this actually makes it a lot easier for him to catch Gastelum coming in, focus on using the jab at all times, high output on the jab, lower output on the power shots, but make them a lot more meaningful, right? This is the style that Cannonier brings into fights. He's very methodical. He downloads data. He starts picking at your openings before he starts firing out there. So the southpaw Cannonier is going to be a lot more efficient in this fight than his orthodox stance, potentially, that is. The thing about the orthodox stance is he has the right hand opening, moving backwards if Kelvin wants to run into a right uppercut, which is one of Cannonier's deadliest weapons. That could work as Kelvin misses the left overhand, or if he goes under for a takedown. That left uppercut is going to be there all day. So orthodox is going to be a lot more focused on countering with power shots, whereas the southpaw stance for Cannonier is going to be more to pick out the openings, download data, and disrupt Kelvin's linear movements. And Kelvin has good footwork. He's a lot more fluid with his movement than Cannonier is, but he's going to have to be, especially with Cannonier's reach, right? That 6-inch reach advantage is massive, and he uses all of it. But with that footwork, Kelvin really likes to move linearly, back and forth, and he acts almost like a spring. He keeps coiling up, looking to explode with that right hook, left straight, or left overhand combination. His combos always go kind of the same way. Blitzes in with a jab left straight, jab left overhand, right hook left overhand, or right hook left straight. It's all very similar, and Kelvin generates a lot of power into his shots, man, especially the left hand of his. 100% if he lands that left hand on Cannonier is going to hurt. And the fact that Cannonier is so immobile in the cage, it allows Kelvin to get off that center line a little bit just with his head, because his footwork generally keeps on that linear line. If he can move his head off the center and slip on one of those long punches from Cannonier, he can land the left hand 100% and finish off this fight. He could potentially even come up with a left high kick that he's going to these days, mixing it up just a bit. And that is what he's going to have to focus on, because Cannonier is very good at evading the startup of your combination or your initial attack. Even against someone like Robert Whittaker, he was able to get away from a lot of those jabs. He was able to get away from the lead right hands, but it was the follow-ups and Whittaker's ability to mix up the striking so well with so many different kind of techniques. That's what was catching Cannonier off guard. But with Kelvin Gastelum, he's a lot more straightforward in his attacks, and he doesn't have that kind of reach. He doesn't have the kind of height. Doesn't have the kind of speed, and he's a lot more obvious with his footwork. It's so linear back and forward. It creates only one path for Kelvin to attack, and that could be very dangerous if he explodes at the wrong moment and Cannonier counters him. But just like I talked about before, Cannonier has that jab that he can sneak in there if Kelvin wants to take the outside foot. Cannonier is not someone who chases you down, steps in, and lands that jab on you all the time like that. If you give him that angle, he will sting you with that jab, or sting you with the right straight, or the right uppercut if Kelvin wants to go under for a takedown, because Cannonier does not have the greatest takedown defense, right? When he tries to wrestle with you, he's not so resistant. So he has learned, instead of trying to sprawl, I'm just gonna hit this guy with my right hand, man. I'm gonna blast him with my cannon, right uppercuts. And at this point of his career, it's almost instinctive for him. Look when he fought David Branch. I mean, not only the knockdown that he got on him, before the knockdown, David Branch simply lowered his levels, didn't really commit with the takedown, and Cannonier just winged up an uppercut. No thought or anything, just threw it out there. And then when you look at his fight with Jack Hermanson, I mean, he finished off Hermanson, stemming off of the uppercut after Hermanson attempted the takedown. And it was a brief moment where that all happened. Same thing could be done against Kelvin, but the thing with Kelvin is, his chin is just something else. I mean, most guys who gets hit by Jared Cannonier are going to go down, but Kelvin might be a different story. He might be able to go under, get hit by the uppercut, eat it, and then carry on with his takedown. He might be the only guy that can do it. There is one difference here though. Jared Cannonier hits harder than everybody Kelvin has ever fought. Besides the kicks of Uriah Hall, nobody has the sheer power that Cannonier has. He brings down heavyweight power, and that's legitimate. The guy started at heavyweight, he came down to light heavyweight, came down to middleweight, and he carried the power all the way down. He touches you and he hurts you. It is what it is. He rocked Robert Whittaker with a jab. He dropped Hermanston with one uppercut. He tore Silva's knee with a leg kick. He dropped David Branch with one right overhand. And that's him off balance too. So if there is anybody who can knock out Kelvin Gastelum with one single punch, the only guy that could do it is probably Jared Cannonier. But ultimately, my prediction for this fight, it's a tough one, but I'm gonna have to lean to Jared Cannonier's side on this one. I think that jab is gonna be disruptive. Every counter he's gonna look for is to knock Kelvin Gastelum out, and like I said, if anybody could do it, it could be him. And I have a hunch someone is going to get finished in this fight, and if someone's getting finished, it's going to be by a TKO or a knockout. And one big contributing factor for Cannonier are the leg kicks. Kelvin does not check kicks at all. He does have small legs, and if Cannonier starts blasting them, this fight is not going to last too long, man. I could definitely see a TKO due to leg kicks. He's just going to have to watch out from Kelvin's left hand if he wants to step in with the kick for that natural setup. It's very similar to what Dustin Poirier was doing when he was getting kicked by Gaethje. So I'm going to go with Jared Cannonier, and I'm going to go by a 4th round TKO. The most likely thing to happen is probably a decision here. I mean, Kelvin is such a hard guy to finish. I'm just going on a hunch that I can see the result of Cannonier finishing off Kelvin Gastelum. Now, if Kelvin wins, he could win through a decision using his wrestling if he's able to get it to the ground. If he gets it to the ground, this fight's not going to be that difficult for him. Other than that, if it's going to be purely striking, I can see Kelvin knocking out Jared Cannonier for sure. The more likely guy getting a knockout is Kelvin over Cannonier, 100%. And that is the end of the predictions, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you did, make sure to give this video a thumbs up. If you enjoyed my content, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. The next Who Really Won.